early onset hearing aids, so we might ask you to pick, speak up if I have to, yeah.
Okay. Okay, we're live. So good afternoon, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Tuesday, February 4th, 2025 at 1 in the afternoon. So this afternoon, we're beginning our afternoon with our state archivist. We've worked with our state archives and state archivists. A few years ago, we were talking about land records during COVID and the issues surrounding some towns have good records and easy to access, others have hard time to access, and there wasn't anything uniform. So we talked with Tanya and he has been putting together a report. And also I thought it was good for the committee to understand what our state archivist actually does. And I'm hoping that sometime this spring we'll be able to take a trip over there, because I've never been over, and I'd love to see what we have over there. I think it's very interesting. Before we ask you to introduce yourself, I'll just ask the committee to introduce themselves to you. We have a lot of new members this year.
Emily Karras Duncan, representing Deerfield Valley, Wilmington, Ladingham, Halifax.
Herm Olson, representing Bristol, Lincoln, Moncton, and Starship.
Edie Granning, representing Jericho and Underhill, and the vice chair of the committee.
And I'm Mike Markoff from Coventry, representing Coventry, Irisburg, Newport Town, Troy J, Westfield, Lowell, and Eden, and chair of the committee.
Kirk White, representing Bethel, Rochester, Stockbridge, and Hancock, and I'm the ranking member.
Monique Priestley, Bradford, Fairleigh, West Fairleigh.
Michael Booton, Berry City.
Tony Nicholas from Milton, representing most of Milton and a little bit of Georgia.
Dave Bosch of Clarendon, representing Wallingford, Clarendon, West Rutland, and the bulk of Rutland Town.
And our member from Burlington is a little under the weather today, but she's joined us on Zoom.
Yep, here I am. I am representing people who are homesick in Burlington. Hello, thanks for joining. I'm going to take my video off.
And our committee assistant. So again, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me. For the record, I'm Tanya Marshall. I'm the state archivist and chief records officer for the state, and also director of the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration. We're part of the Secretary of State's office, and I know the Secretary of State was here giving an overview of the office, but I thought I would start just introducing myself to the committee, and I appreciate your taking the time to introduce yourself to me, and welcome and congratulations on the start of the session and then all the great work that you're going to do this session. And then I'll give an overview of the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration, and then I'll give you an update for the most recent legislation that was sponsored by Chair Marco, along with Representative Kimball, who's now in Ways and Means, and I was there last week for that. But so who am I, and just some background. I have actually been with the state of Vermont since 2003. I came out of graduate school through a very odd process. I did work between undergrad and graduate school, and went to school in the DC area, and got my master's degree in library and information science, and then was invited to stay on for a doctoral program there, which I did and focused on. And my focus has always been government records and information, specifically digital era. And so I'm dating myself, but it was called electronically stored information back then. And being in the DC area, I was focused on federal government sector. And when I got towards the end and was ready to do my dissertation, the program informed me that they didn't think that government archives and records and information was really scholarly enough to continue, and that maybe being an archivist was not a profession either. So not sure what you do with that information, but my husband and I had 3 children, 2 and under. We have twins, and we decided to relocate from the area to Vermont. And 5 months later, I got a call from the Secretary of State stating that the legislature had just passed an archives law to create a state archives, and there really isn't a lot of archivists here to help. And I came in as a temporary project archivist to figure that out, and I hadn't quite been prepared for what it looked like here. I'm originally from New York, Western New York. Part-time there, also got hired by the court administrator's office to understand more about their records, and then worked on a project with the court administrator's office, the Secretary of Administration, and the Secretary of State to say, how do we look at comprehensively all the records and information at the state and local level and come up with a strategy? And from that, wrote a number of legislative reports and supported with those preliminary strategic plans. That was around 2005 and 2006. And the legislature created the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration in 2008. And so before that, records and information management was actually done by Buildings and General Services, which everyone kind of does a puzzle look as I see happening. There had been a Department of Public Records that was pretty high within the executive branch in the 50s and 60s, but over the years, it really just got relegated down to the storage. And really was just moving records in and out of buildings versus actually managing them. And so when we were formed, the Department of Information and Innovation had actually been started. That is the predecessor to the Agency of Digital Services. We all worked together to kind of look at not to have that happen with the digital realm as well. But that's how and I'm an information scientist by background. If I didn't have that experience that I had in that graduate program working in the federal government, I would not have, been able, I think, to achieve this. With everyone's support here, but also to be able to support the state of Vermont in the way that I was. And I would not have actually had the practical experience to see what we can do as a state and what we can actually do better, because we are a small state, and I always feel that we can do much better. The Vermont State Archives and Records Administration is 20 people full-time. We're pretty much divided. And so our role is really the statewide records and information management program. That's something the legislature updated in 2018. Our scope is anything written or recorded in the course of government business at the local or state level, and understanding exactly what, from a federal and state perspective, from a legal perspective, what's expected with that information, who's charged and responsible for it, who's charged, and understanding where that information has to be exchanged. And then our authorities are set on actually setting policy. So underneath the law is not allowed to destroy anything that's written or recorded in the course of business. So if people have the sticky note, yes, that is how the law is written. But we're able to have strategies to make it so much easier. And then it is not based on format. It's doesn't matter if it's digital, doesn't matter if it's a data log, doesn't matter if it's a physical piece of paper. It's all based on allowing people to better manage their records and information, and then also provide the services. So we have a number of different strategies underneath that program. We have two main service areas. One is our administrative and reference services. So we do have a public research room. We operate the state archives. So this is where all three branches of state government can actually give full custody, legally and physically, to us of records that are considered permanent. So those would be records that protect rights, your legislative acts when you pass them. We not only take care of them, we get your committee records after, and we preserve them for the public to come in and do research, as well as attorneys and others. But so we also have a public research room, so that reference part, but we also do, underneath our admin services and our reference services, the Administrative Procedure Act that goes through the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration. We're the filing office, and we help circulate that documentation, those notifications. For legislative clerking, so the number that gets assigned to the legislative act when it's passed by the legislature, it's actually done by the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration. And we formalize that process for the actual written documentation, as well as what's happening out of the committees. We do municipal district formations. So when those are the communication union districts, for example, how they have to file with the Secretary of State, we form those districts as corporate bodies and political bodies underneath the law. We certify vital records. We're an issuing agent for the state, along with the Department of Health. And then we manage under statutory filings. And then if individuals are coming, so it's mainly our public facing part that happens in our admin services and reference services area. We have another service unit, technical services. We operate 3 statewide repositories for records and information. One is the State Record Center. So that's located in Middlesex. That's where everything stays with the agency or department or court that's storing it there, but they don't need it in their active space, their inactive records. It's a large warehouse. So I do invite you to come see it, because it's quite impressive. When we took it over, it was overflowing and it was crazy, but we put a lot of good management onto that. It's being phased out too, as more people are moving to digital. but we don't own the records. We just provide the services for them. We do about 100 requests a day to go back out to wherever the records need to go on that. And then we do have the state archives vault. So this is for paper or analog records that we take legal custody of. The majority of our records right now coming into the state archives are from the judiciary. We're the only state in the country that is not just focused on executive branch records. Our scope is all three branches, and we have this great collaboration with the judiciary that when cases are closed and they're done with their process and they can't be reopened, but they're determined to be permanent for legal and other purposes, they do transfer those to us. So their state archives vaults right now, what we're doing is a courthouse sweep. They've moved to electronic filing and record keeping, and essentially the last set of paper records are coming into our facilities in the state archives for that. And then we also have the digital state archives. And so this are records that are digital format that are now done with, their active use within whatever branch of government they're in, and we take legal custody of them and we provide access. So our biggest area there is committee records from the General Assembly. We do about 9 terabytes a session coming out between this and the videos. It wasn't always 9 terabytes, but the videos have a greater part of that. But we work with your legislative IP on that. And so we operate those repositories. Our charge underneath the law is that if there's an enterprise-wide or statewide repository, they're to be managed in the way that the legislature has defined for records management and to meet those requirements. And then if it's not a repository that we actually manage, of those 3, is that we work with whoever is managing those enterprise repositories to make sure that those who are using them have all the abilities to be compliant with the laws that are passed at the federal state level and to be more efficient in their record keeping. So right now, the largest, more record keeping, but not necessarily with those management, they're managed by the Agency of Digital Services. So we're starting to collaborate with them more to make sure that we actually have better tools within those systems for those users in there. And then we have 2 programs. One is the Target Assistance Program. It's focused on executive branch and judicial branch. So we have, half of my staff have master's degrees in information science and information management. So we deploy those to each agency or department or the courts. We have 1 FTE specifically for the judiciary, help them with the record keeping and management problems and help them write policies and determine, day-to-day operational work. And then we have 2 FTEs for the executive branch in there. 1 works specifically with the agencies and departments and the state officials, and 1 works specifically with boards and commissions. We also manage boards and commissions registry request of the legislature to kind of understand how many boards and commissions the legislature creates every year or has. That was a great, if you're on that committee when that first started, it was 250. We have the same amount of Minnesota in about 3,000 different appointees. So that's new. That's one of the new things that we have in the legislature. So we have 1 FTE though working with, these are just state executive branch. It's not at the local level, working with those boards and commissions to help them manage their records and also compliance. And then we have another program that's kind of blended, and it's historical and records program and the local records program. So we often have people out in the field in different locales. So they're working together. The first focus is local government. So we can help with any of the local government sector, what's county-based, which we don't really have too much, but regional, like regional planning commissions. And then also the municipalities and all the different offices at that level. And we have someone who kind of roves the state to help support that, which I'll talk about more in the land records part. And then at the same time, we've added 2 FTEs in recent years for historical records program. It's out of scope in the sense of public records, but there's so many requests and needs among the historical societies and others that we wanted to make sure we had a sustainable resource and program to actually provide the same types of technical services that we would provide just an agency department. So we have those 2 in balance. So if they go out, sometimes they're blended within a public library. You're still going to find a historical society in there. Or if you're in a municipality, there might have been a blend of how that space has been used. So we have about 4 FTEs that are within that community-based for different purposes. And that's kind of the scope of our team. We're all of 20. We operate kind of a records officer, records liaison program for state government, where we actually have a network of 500 people actively working across you'll have each records officer within an agency who's responsible for the records and information management. We support that person, mentor, And then they can actually appoint liaisons within their different divisions. So between the executive branch and judicial branch, we're about 500 strong for that. So that's one of our strategies for that. The other stuff that we do that tends to more fall on the state archivist or, chief records officer is providing information back to the legislature for legislative research purposes. And that's really the thing that I extend to this committee, and I do this for all committees, is that when you have a question and you're not sure about like, what do we do in the past? Or, why is it like this? What does this word mean? We can do additional legislative research. We have the legislative records and documentation to go back and explain and to help problem solve around those. So some recent ones we've done that are in tandem with the records management work that we actively do now. Recent legislative reports include blockchain. So there's a question if you get this to go through this committee. There was a lot of questions about using blockchain and can you use it for public record keeping, and having to kind of walk through what the legislation says, but look at it as a whole. Data privacy, which also went through parts of this committee, is understanding where, a data element may or may not have protections and why, so that at least the legislature can see the bigger picture. And we're able to provide reports on right down to each statute and what it expected for an agency to not only collect information, but what was the accessibility requirements and where were those data exchanges. Recently, and it was just passed in June, or signed officially kind of signed off, is Act 173 of last year, which was foster care and juvenile proceedings. We were the first state to ensure full access to individuals who were placed in foster care to have access to their files and their judicial juvenile proceeding. There was a lot of opening for adoption records, and then realizing that the laws actually did not open up for individuals who may have been placed in foster care but not adopted. So that was like a last minute request to be, why did we do this? And what's preventing it now based on the statutes? And we're able to come with a legislative report last year to talk about, why that happened and give a history behind that closure, but also to make recommendations of where two statutes could change and allow that. And so that's what happened last year with that report. We've also done vital records modernization, talk about land records modernization in a minute, to help the legislature with permit reform. The current Division of Racial Statistics and the Office of Racial Equity. That's part of the initial plan that we did around criminal justice data. So we're all over in doing that particular work and helping as well. So I always extend that if you have a question or you don't know, just feel free to reach out. That is our job, is to provide, we're legislative research. We're here to do that. And if you're working on certain types of work. And then just one more additional thing to realize that we do is that we take all your laws as you pass them. I was looking at the one on the board, H34, and if it gets enacted as we have a system in a framework that we will go through every single act and identify, has a new body been created? And what have they been asked to do from a function level? How has the legislature defined that function? Does it have like a term around it in an actual language? And then we look at all the transactions that you're asking them to do. So where if it says to report, we know there's an expectation of written and recorded information. If it says a system that collects X, then we know that we're looking at different data elements. It's all within scope of the statewide records and information management program. And then we can look through it and analyze it to say, where is all the other areas that it touches, that there could be some opportunity for streamline and efficiency, or maybe it was completely missed in that original draft. So if you have bills that you're looking at and you ever want just a perspective, where does this intersect with something else? Are we missing something? Then that's also a thing we can do during the bill drafting stage to help. It's objective. We're not doing policy. It's just part of our model. And it's really helped us with the state archives for perspectives. Like we track every entity that's ever been created backwards, forward. And then we track government functions, right? Exactly what activity and who intersects on different areas. So if you think about that one for foster care, you have currently DCF, right? Working with, children in need of care and supervision, but then you have the judiciary doing the same thing, but they're adjudicating on certain kind of decisions related to that. and watching where they need to blend. And that's exactly what we built out for some of the criminal justice. So I'll pause there because I just gave you a lot, but hopefully you get an idea that we're really just involved in understanding exactly what's required from written and recorded information and what is not legally required, helping people also manage that just because that's part of the workflow and processes. You know, this is a reference source because I printed it from another source and it's my documentation. It's obsolete after I'm done with it, so I can destroy it. Those kinds of things are key because we're really looking at making sure everybody in the state, whether you're local or a state government, have something that's justifiable and defensible should they be asked, but also to make sure we have government accountability and transparency in what we do, and to make that easier. So we really scope that we're always fostering strategies and technologies to simplify things for folks, and always operating those professional services they just described at the statewide level. And at the end, we just want the right information to get to the right people at the right time.
Questions? Go ahead.
So you mentioned that you have a list of all of the commissions. Is that somewhere public on your website?
I would love it to be public on our website right now, but we don't have the capability to push data that way. But we have been, we can provide that to you, and we do have a link back through Legislative Council and others to provide that information. So if you'd like to, we can provide you with the data set. Yeah.
And then my other question is around how you work versus how your department works in other states.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so how does what your agency, your department do compare to what other states use this, the archivist and records for?
Yeah, so in most others, well, in terms of state archives and state archivist role, most states is only within the executive branch and is an appointee of the governor. I'm a classified employee. It's put into statute specifically to ensure not only background that meets that need, but that it's not considered to be like a political appointee position. It's not common to have the chief records officer role combined with the state archivist role. We did that because there were so many and the chief information officer has really been highly only tech. And we wanted to make sure there's visibility around, records. I do have, there's a lot of people have feelings of what they think a record is. We're always trying to go back and say it is what the law in Vermont says, which is just written and recorded information. So that's unusual. It may not have been that if it wasn't some of the background that I particularly had, but when I first came here, I asked a lot of questions. I'm a pretty curious person, and so for that archives law, some of it was I was sent out to Middlesex where the record center was located and focused on one room that had about 3,500 boxes of paper records that had just been stored there. But I kept walking out to the record center that had 100,000, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense to just be focused there if there were bigger issues. And so that's unusual as well. And it's unusual for us to also have a layer of the director of an actual Vermont State Archives and Records Administration. But I would say we're also the most modern. We're kind of we're the last state by legislation to have a state archive. So even though we're the 14th state, we didn't do that by legislation until 2008. So we didn't have we kind of had to start anew. But most state archives are only focused with the executive branch, and they're not actively directly involved with the day-to-day operations and record keeping of state government. And the reality is that you wouldn't have much of an archives, especially in the digital realm, if we weren't doing this. So that's different. We're a little bit similar more to the National Archives and Records Administration, but they also do not embed themselves within an agency or department. But for us, we follow what we call a continuum, which means we can tell people up front, we know what the management requirements are before that record even, if you're creating legislation, we're able to kind of set that now and want those technologies to be leveraged for that. So we're a unique role, but I think it's a small state. I'm not sure if that gets to parts of your question or if you had more. Yeah.
No, it does. It does. I'm going to open a can of worms, and I don't expect us to go down this rabbit hole, but when we think about every town holding the records on their land sales and things like that, and how disjointed that system is, and understanding that you hold records in one central location. I'm wondering if at some point that might be a transition that the state could do. I know that it wouldn't be an easy, or like, again, understand gigantic can of worms.
Well, yeah.
And
Well, when you're ready to talk about land records, then we can position to me, giving you an update on land records. Yeah, because I don't think you're opening a can of worms with that question. Yeah.
okay, great.
Are there any other questions I could answer right now about the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration, or do you feel like I've given you a good overview for what we do at least, or who we are?
I think I need a PhD.
Huh?
Yeah, it requires a PhD.
It was just how, it's, you look back and you wouldn't regret that. I really came here and thought, I have no idea what I'm going to do now since archivist isn't a profession.
Yeah.
In government information, but I think as a transition of those library science programs at the time, and I was given options to stay, but I wasn't really interested in medical scholar journals and doctors and how they use them. That just wasn't what I really wanted to do. So I always appreciate that phone call in the middle of, a November day, and I'm home with, 3 kids, and it's not Maryland in November here. And hey, and I had no idea. I'd never been to Montpelier. I didn't know where I was really expecting, but it's been wonderful. And we've all done it together as a state, and I'm a very collaborative person, and it's problem solving. You want to be the most efficient and get people where they need to go. And so even with the records and information management program, we have a maturity model that goes from, and it's just we're actually charged to use industry standards and best practices and adopt them, in the statute. That's our charge. And so it's a great model that goes like 1 to 5, and 1 is just ad hoc, and it's just 8 principles. Accountability, do you have someone who's responsible and knows it? Second one is transparency, and transparency is really around documentation. Is there actually documentation around your information so people can know what to do, but also to audit what you do and understand? Integrity, we want correct information, right? And then protections, one of the other pillars, and we want secure and repositories. We also want to make sure things aren't accidentally, just gone. And then, we have compliance and availability, which are what's your question? And then retention and disposition. If you don't need to have it longer than you need to, and that's the majority of records created, we want them out because we really can't focus on the things that we need to focus. And the scale goes from ad hoc, which means and we judge where those happening. We look at patterns that are happening in certain, parts of the state where accountability, like agencies feel that their accountability has gone down because of certain factors, and try to get that in front of the legislature or whoever they're working with. But 5 is transformative, like actually using your information to provide the services and solve the problems. And, some agency of human services has gone from 2 with just 1 FTE, who's an indirect report to me, who has an information management background, to 4. And 4 is proactive, already getting in front of things before it happens. And so to have an agency that's half the state government do that is pretty and fantastic. So I applaud and thank you at the legislature for enabling us to do that and putting those parameters within our statutes.
One thing that I found interesting too, is you're talking about government accountability. And, tomorrow at our chairs meeting, we're talking about having people come in to talk about government accountability. And I'm going to suggest that they might want to check in with you as well.
That'd be wonderful. And I think that gets to the question, and sometimes the perception of archivists is, we do obviously work with older sets of records, and our records go back to 1760 because of the way the court system is. But moving, really the direction that we have, the government sector everywhere is that, that field of knowing that you have accurate, reliable information in a world of disinformation and misinformation. And then you have, artificial intelligence. It is about we want to make sure that people are getting the right information from the government sector, and that's accurate. And that's going to be even more critical. And that's kind of the background and role that we have.
So that, I'm glad you asked that. Because now I'm thinking about authentication of what is a government document? And that must be something that is taking up a lot of bandwidth and.
Yeah. I mean, we
so
have-
much dynamic activity with that.
Well, we have the traditional role, which is in the past, and it's still this way across the country, authenticating documents for use in like internet, like outside of the United States, and the ability to take a certified public record, for example, like a certified birth certificate, so it can be used as a document legally in Spain, and there's a whole international law around that. We do that as part of our function at the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration, and authenticating Vermont notarized documents. My background when I was in graduate school, that particular issue, it is so easy to falsify, even more so in some ways a digital record than it is a paper record, because there's certain controls. Like if you think about, dating things back, is in the past we used to have file clerks and paper, and it was kind of a controlled gatekeeper role. And then the onset of personal computers, a lot of people start creating a lot of things. And then it just explodes. So we have over storage of things. And, I can pull up documents and look at the properties, and I can, make determinations that, this document must have been a copy of something that came from Texas, right? That someone thought would look like a good policy, right? And got a Word version of it, started writing it, but never changed the metadata like behind the scenes. So then it gets a question. So then we're always looking at how do we authenticate within this realm? And, it's different because it's not expected legal authentication, but we do operate, our digital archives is a digital preservation system, and it is designed to make sure that we get this record directly from the body. So we get your legislative records directly from legislative IT. And then that digital preservation system, which is I'm a records nerd geek person, but we worked on this as a multi-state federal grant project in 2006 and 2007, essentially allowed that we bring it in, we fix it, right? We have to lock it down and say, this is it as received. So we always have the authentic original copy as received. But as technology changes, as it does, think about your first word processing. Mine was Clarisburg's. We have WordStar documents still on servers here. We can bring it in, and rather than buying all the licensing, that particular system and that vendor that we worked with to develop it, enables us to render it in ways to show and provide continued access, but we always are able to show the original, which is a really key part. And we don't have this particular system tied right now to our active systems in the state, and that's a concern. But one of the things that we want to propose on the land records, particularly, that is really important. If we're, we don't want to duplicate effort by having paper and, digital, but we obviously, and we don't want to say, go get 256 odd plus digital preservation systems. Let's be creative and innovative, bring the cost down, but also take that weight off of, individual offices. And so that, the federal grant program was run through the Library of Congress. We had multi-states. We're the smallest state in that, but the goal of that particular one was digital legislative information as a start. Second part of it was, how do you get a commercial base that's low entry? Because usually for an appropriation, no one's saying, let's give more money, to the state archive. And that was definitely the case back then. And we've been with that particular program developing. We just did a connector, which is really exciting, to Microsoft 365, because we're a Microsoft 365 state, which allows state agencies to continue their access if they transfer it to the state archives, but they can actually say that they don't own it. So the public records piece is a big thing for them to say, go to the state archives for your public records request. We've transferred our records there. And yeah, it's working through, it's not, it just keeps evolving. So I'm glad that you asked that, because that gets back to that key part of why we're looking at archives and archivists to kind of upskill on that tech piece in particular, for those who are interested, because it's going to be critical and more critical. But having the right tools and systems is that strategy as well. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Transfer to.
Yeah. See. Oh, good. So land records. I added, and you'll see it on your documents list, the report that we issued last January to the legislature for an update. So X 171 of 2022 was really considered to be the first step towards modernization. It wasn't designed to overhaul the laws or do anything that we've done, as it's just an initial first step. And what it enabled was an overlay law within the statutes that would allow town clerks to transition to electronic reporting. And then that enables these systems to move forward. So it's an overlay law in the sense that the land records laws, which is what we saw with the vital records, so it's not surprising. The land records laws for the towns are really antiquated. And there's a lot going on that are even outside of their statutes related to what points to things to go into the land records. And to try to do it comprehensively at that particular time was not really in the best interest for I think anyone, because we needed to know more. And that's kind of that legislative research background, but also that problem solving around information management. And so the Act 171 was largely, most bulk of that bill was for electronic notaries, like moving forward with doing notarization electronically as well. And that's in our other division, Office of Professional Regulation. And then the land records is the first step for this uniformity and consistency, which people are not seeing among, municipal clerks who are responsible for recording land records. So we wrote that report when the COT analysis was to say, look at the systems that are currently out there. The legislature did appropriate $2 million during COVID for the towns that, to back what I call back scan. So things that were already recorded, but to make them digital and accessible. They didn't have systems at that time. And I see Mr. Delia here. So we really talked about how to best kind of move that forward. But really, it ended up being grants administered out to the towns that we worked with the Department of Taxes that had that relationship already to administer. So a number of towns kind of stood up systems at that point. But the focus was always the back file conversion and not, kind of moving into the modernization stage for that. And there's about 3 or 4 systems operating right now. So the charge in that report was to look at, what the landscape looks like for municipalities. And we reported that inside the report and also what the current costs are. So in terms of fees coming in, there's a consolidated fee report that is required underneath statute. So we use the data from that report to get a good sense for how much revenue is coming in on a reporting, how much is coming out, what are the system costs that towns are reporting. It's a very low, it's required every 3 years, and I put it in the report. There's a very low response rate for that. And it's a report that is jointly submitted to the legislature by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns and the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association. But for those towns that reported and had systems, what we did was took their data, normalized it, made sure that, if you haven't got them also data, that's kind of the background, is taking and extrapolating information, and combined it with the data that came from the Department of Taxes for their real property information. So we could kind of get a sense for what was the average, costs that are currently being expended on a per property basis. We have about 340,000 taxable properties in here. And so when we came last year, and I put it on the second page of my written testimony that I submitted, is, the first step, the modernization, was just getting that door open and allowed Basara to focus, and the legislature appropriated an FTE to support that work. And it took a long time for us to hire somebody and find somebody to really do this. So our recruiting is very difficult, but very, very difficult after COVID. So we don't have programs in the state that really support this. So we're often mentoring, entry-level individuals sometimes, or someone who has a desire to move to Vermont, which is a little bit harder now, obviously, for that. So it took a while to recruit for that position. The things that we listed out last year when I came to the committee was, the second step was really a future policy decision. It's not something that we can really make. Well, we can't make it. You would have to make this as a legislature. Is that when we start untangling the laws for the land records and understanding, most states will just be deeds and conveyances and ownership changes. What the land records in Vermont has become, and we say land records, meaning that that's the phrase that's used for what's recorded or required to be recorded in the town clerk's office as a quote unquote land record. And the report includes parts of that. It's become some of a finding aid as well, meaning there are certain parts of legislation that will say, well, put a notice, record a notice that there's a permit over here in the land records. There's certain laws, and I didn't outline them, would say, we're thinking of a development, require it to be recorded in the land records for this possibility of a development in this particular area. So there's a lot of those things that then really, open the door, which we knew, but now more solidified, is that land records, I would just say, real property records and information is, we have a lot of different moving parts around it. And we have different entities at different times based on how they were structured to do that. So what was started with just being recorded in the land records, we also have zoning and permitting records. We obviously have assessment records. So we have the whole assessor and lister's office happening. We have a number of different, pockets throughout state governments. Sometimes permitting was started at the municipal level. Now it's at the state level. We work with all these entities. We have this big picture view of where all this real property information is. And so what we proposed last year was, it started with just starting with the land, with the town clerks to say, be far more efficient. Some of these towns just do too few transactions and have too few properties to even invest in a system that's going to move them forward, that they would really be, if we had a multi-town, or a multi-jurisdiction system, that would get them over the hurdle because they really can't move forward with modernization. And one of the examples I put in the report last year is how we've done that in the executive branch. So we're in what we call multi-tenant. We have enterprise systems. Everyone does their own business within the system. They don't see other people's information, but it's one system that's doing this. And so last year when we came and we talked about that, we have about 100 or odd some towns that still really can't move forward. And, they feel a lot of pressure to, backfile scan, but that's a risk when we talked about authentication. I mean, the key part is you want to know whatever's been converted from a paper to digital for legal certainty that it is and nothing's missing. And that's a huge risk on that. So that's why this uniform law that we put in as an overlay law is about that component. But now that the Act 68 report has come out for appraisals and reappraisals, and that was at Ways and Means last week, when we're down in the offices of municipalities, and even between these two, the state asks a lot of different things. And it might be just two people, an assessor or / lister and a town clerk. And the focus has become is they go to multiple different state systems all day long for different things and for different purposes. And yet nobody actually looks at the municipality and says, what is actually going to be more efficient for that municipality? Or how can we be more efficient for municipalities? And so when that report came out, I'll tell you, it was not even on my radar for Act 68 last year. I mean, we talked about, we knew it'd be tangential and we knew it'd be integrated. But now that we've seen the report and it references that, making a recommendation to legislature that we actually, look at this from a big picture for real property. I think it makes a lot of sense on that, because we can't help modernize even the town clerks for what they have, but the laws have a lot of different things going on. They're pointing people to different directions. So we've had, real estate attorneys contact us and says, "Oh, it's great for the land, quote unquote, land records." But the minute there's a reference, a cover sheet to go look in the zoning records, we're still going to have to go there and find the zoning records. And then we've had from the Natural Resources Board, which is now the Land Use Advisory Board, I might be misquoting. They came to us because the legislature had given them a lot of money to, convert their files for accessibility, but they didn't have a system, so we're doing a lot of different pockets. So I think the recommendation that we have is still the same, but that it's really a policy decision of the legislature. But if you're to focus on real property in records and information. And if we're able to use some of the modeling, I think we would be able to show the legislature all the different areas where it intersects. And then you can make a decision on whether or not you would, want to see a single system or integrated platform. Because even between what the town clerks are doing, it's being duplicated or referenced for different purposes. And there's obviously a large, huge stakeholder base for all different functions that relate to real property. But nobody's really stepped back since no one's really stepped back from this. It's all little pockets and the legislation's not there. So that's where I kind of had this next step to modernization might be, taking a step back. And it doesn't take long to take a step back, but maybe we should look at it at the municipal level. And so we've been working and talking with the city of Burlington. So that's the biggest one. And they've made a lot of efficiencies in modernization, and they recognize that they're able to do that because they have more resources than, say, the smallest town. But they also have a lot of pain points that don't even enable them to become more efficient because they're asked to jump into all these multiple different systems with different kind of formats and to do this. And even though they feel, confident, they would love to come back and really talk about where they see these pain points. And met with them yesterday, really spearhead, a group to work together within the municipalities so that it's not about Burlington. It's about really us looking at everyone together and what can be recommended. So it's really a policy decision on that. But what I'll do is give you then a brief update of where we are with the town clerks. But I'll pause there because I think if you do look at the Act 68 report, it references the Act 171 report recommendations. And it talks about the parallels there. Of course, it is going to be focused on what the immediate need is. But in talking to Ways and Means and what they're describing, with grand list data is that it's still inconsistent. It's not uniform. It's not, it's all the same reasons that we had for the land records. And then on top of that, one of the things that came out in the preliminary reports for Act 68 was that there was no way to even validate use so unless there was better synergies and understanding what was recorded in the land record. So we're not getting good data. So if our job is wanting to get the right information to the right people at the right time, that's not going to be achievable with all these different, takes on it. And as a property owner, the property owner has no visibility whatsoever without jumping around to different places about what records, for their own deeds and conveyances. They can go to a, individual town clerk office. But then when you talk about what rights of use they have on their particular property, you're talking about zoning and permitting, which is split between the state and the local, depending on what kind of permit it is. And then they have to go separately to the assessor and lister to understand what they're actually being assessed as a tax. And, I've owned three properties in Vermont. My first one, I'll just give you, is that we ended up buying a property that was only permitted for a single family home with a mound system. When we went to buy, it was built as a duplex with a gravity fed septic system, which is why we just need a vacant house. We had 30 days to move and we had kids and dogs and we just needed to do that. So a vacant house, no matter what it looked like. But to think about how those assessor records and those land records and then those permit use didn't match from the 30 years that the prior owner had them. I mean, that's just one example. So to me, it's about doing the right thing and looking at the big picture and not looking at short-term wins that could be short-sighted on that. And we've talked to the clerks about that. The last couple of pages are the presentation that we've done. A lot of it's introducing to electronic recording and getting a sense of what that looks like and the efficiencies. And that's really where we focus. It would be much more efficient, to submit a document, whether it's coming from a bank or just to have that electronically submitted and have that remain digital and have that within a secure system with an audit trail is significant. It takes away a lot of the other things that they're working through. Cashiering is very, very difficult. So having a single point of cashiering, in some ways you can envision with these money, coming in is that it's really just cutting a check at the end for the actual transactions rather than all the different things that have to happen if it was in a single portal. And the one thing that we, asked and no one's really said anything different is that feeling that the need that all municipalities need to be shored up. And here it shouldn't be among, those that have systems right now, they could transition right away, but it wouldn't help any of their other counterparts. And that is still half of the state. So while we're doing that kind of bigger picture work, we actually have folks on the field inside each of the town clerk's offices, helping them with all their different records, but also getting an assessment of what their current pain points are, what their issues are, and then rolling that out to understand from the municipality stand when you have real property, what are the other things that the zoning office is saying, what are the things that the assessors and listers are saying, and wanting to give them the voice and opportunity to talk about those. But I feel there's a lot of opportunity for solutions and strategies, which is what our core focus is for Rosara. But that's where we are. So we're out there in that we consider each municipality a client. And we're having that information, we're shoring up what we can do, but even on a simple part of indexing, which we've talked about with the land records, that data has to go into the assessor's office. And that data is now being assessed and reviewed underneath Act 68 about what actual information is needed. So there aren't really separations for these. So it seems like a prime opportunity to talk about those synergies with the assessors and listers at minimum as well.
So I never had the pleasure of, I'm an attorney, a retired attorney, never had the pleasure of working with land records, never would touch it with a 10-foot pole. But my dealings with municipal clerks and attorneys who actually do that is that it's an incredibly complex system, very prone to error. I can imagine just how things have accreted over the decades, if not centuries. It would take an enormous effort to move it in a more rational direction. But I applaud you for being out there, talking to folks. If you could ever, manage a project like that and make it more rational, less costly, and more accurate, it would be a huge, huge benefit, I think, to so many people.
Well, that's what the modernization effort is. And, what we strive for all our projects in work is that if you look backwards, it's really daunting and scary, right? So the whole objective is look forward. As of this date, everything that's coming in to be recorded is going to be recorded exactly the same way and same process. And then work through what has already been recorded, because then you get a finite set that you're working through. What we have right now is we have two tandem things happening. And I think we as a state have made it complicated when it doesn't need to be complicated, because we never have taken, there was a Municipal Land Records Commission. I was chair of it. It was pretty green at the time. So I think that's why the Secretary of State's office is like, you go there. And I just didn't understand, why we couldn't have a consortia, for a system, because that's what libraries do, right? And if you're doing the same process and everyone's doing the same process, and back then, hardware would have been, if someone would have had to stand it up. Now we have cloud-based systems. And, it's really about watching with the paint. We just keep layering things on it versus just stepping back and saying it's 2025. We have the abilities with right technologies. We have the opportunity to kind of start, fresh. And there is the recording responsibility within the Constitution, that sits with town clerks. But we don't have to make it more inefficient for them. And yeah, you're going to have different pockets. And I told us at Ways and Means, some people, they like what they did and that's just how they've done it. But from a cost savings efficiency, that's not, our goal is always to make sure it's efficient and cost effective. So I think the legislature has some really good opportunities between those two different reports to make a policy decision. If your policy decision, what we had is a proof of concept project with municipal clerks for those who don't have systems, but we've also been stymied, and it came up last year, is that we did go to the Agency of Digital Services, which is where we get support on technology. But the response that came back after a number of weeks was that they couldn't support it. They would need one legislative direction, like a legislation to stay because it's municipal, it's not state government. And also they would want an appropriation because of how they're funded. So that's difficult. And so when we started looking, talking to others, we do want to put it back into the municipalities. And I think the city of Burlington, if you're to take this path or get testimony, starting with them, because I think it's like the Agency of Human Services. It went from maturity of like very low to 4, and they're the largest agency in state government. So now we have a situation where you do have, the largest municipality can really help and inform how to develop that system that helps everybody. And it's not just directed on what the state thinks or a particular stakeholder thinks in a particular area of records for real property.
Raises a clarifying question for me then. Does the committee's remit include consumer protection at a municipal scale if this is your primary wealth? It's based on this record being true for the land you're going to sell, the home, or something like that. Does consumer protection in that instance or government accountability, transparency extend in this committee to municipally held records and administered records? Yeah. Does it?
It should. I mean, I would put, I would say.
I'm just curious. I guess I hope so.
There was just a bunch of head nodding.
Oh.
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was a yes or a what.
So one of the things that we watch is
The question is,
You know-
where's the line?
Yeah, okay.
electronic recording started in other states in the 90s. So we're so far behind. It's like that thing we started new and start. One of the biggest things that happened with exposure on that is consumer fraud. Fraudulent documents being filed and recorded. And we don't achieve that particular level of protection if we're not actually in an enterprise, area that we can aggregate this information. So a consumer can know that someone's filed something on their particular property. So if you're a property owner, like I said, you don't always know what's been filed on your property. That's been one of the biggest, ones that come in from that. And, as a state, we wouldn't be able to achieve that at scale for individuals because, it's not just about that one municipality. They may own properties in others. So some of those also benefits. The other things that have come up in the legislature is a mobile home park task force last year, needing the visibility to know where all the different mobile homes are. Sorry, mobile homes, not mobile home parks. And those bills of sale are in the municipal offices. And it's pretty labor intensive process, but there's no system. They don't get recorded. But they're real. I mean, they may not meet the classic definition of real property, but in Agency of Natural Resources, they use run with the land. And I feel like that's really the scale that the state needs to have. We've had 2 floods. We've had a lot of different, variations on tax appraisals. We've had all this stuff. If you as a legislature want to see things in a grand way, you do need this information and it needs to be, so there's all different ways that we benefit. And I think we're a small state. I think we should be able to do it. But those are all policy decisions. I'm only here to objectively tell you what we're seeing and where we're on in the first stage, which is just, getting everyone acclimated with what electronic recording would look like and then assessing within those offices what's happening.
How often, so it occurs to me that you're actually a really key bedrock part of our administrative or statewide administrative goings-ons. How much do you deal with like the various other agencies within the system?
Oh, like parts of state government?
Yeah.
We're everywhere. Whether we're actively inside their programs helping them, it's on their options to let us know, but we still collect all their information from your legislation. So if you're working on certain bills or you need to see something, that whole model that we have, which is like a little graphic that I didn't share with it, but it's all within, once we put it in the system, we can run analysis, but most agencies and departments are networked into us for at least information management and then some of their IT projects, depending on what they are.
Questions? Good. Anya, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Very informative.
Don't hesitate to reach out. Marshall@vermont.gov. Any question, doesn't matter. Happy to help with anything that you might be working on and please come and visit us in Middlesex. And happy to schedule a time if the committee ever wants to come out and see what we do in the physical world out there.
Great. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
To call what you were. So. You bet.
Yeah, I forgot.
No.
Yeah.
My dad taught.
Yeah, my mother's still she was.
Hello, Commissioner.
Yeah, we can follow up on it.
Since we're both youngins.
I've gotten 70.
Hi, Wendy.
Hello, Mr. Chair, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Fine, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Good. Sorry, I
Thank
can't be
you.
there in person.
Well, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
I thought it'd be a good idea. We don't intersect with you too much, but you are part of what drives some of the economy in the state, and I thought it would be good for the committee to understand what liquor lottery does. And
Absolutely.
so I think before we do get started, I'll ask the committee to introduce themselves to you so you know who's put the face to the name.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Cooper. I live in Pownell. Bennington 1 includes Pownell, Reedsboro, Stamford, Searsburg, and Woodford.
Hi, and I'm Emily Karras. I represent Wilmington, Whitingham, and Halifax.
Herb Olson, representing Bristol, Lincoln, Moncton, and Starksville.
Hi, good to see you. Edie Granning, representing
Hi.
Jericho and Underhill and the vice chair of the committee.
And Mike Marcotte from Coventry, representing Coventry, Harrisburg, Newport Town, Troy, J, Westfield, Lowell, and Eden, and chair of the committee.
And one of our lottery agents.
Yes, ma'am.
Kirk White, represent Bethel, Rochester, Stockbridge, and Hancock, and I'm the ranking member.
Monique Priestley, Bradford, Fairleigh, West Fairleigh.
Hi, Wendy. It's Michael Booton, Berry City.
Hi.
Tony Miklas, representing Milton and a little bit of Georgia.
Dave Bosch from Clarendon, representing Wallingford, Clarendon, West Rutland, and the bulk of Rutland Town.
And joining us on Zoom today is our under the weather member from Burlington.
Hi, Wendy. It's Abby Duke from Burlington and a holder of a liquor license.
Oh, great. Hi, Abby. Which liquor license?
A catering liquor
Oh,
license.
great.
I own a catering company in
Oh, good.
Burlington. Yeah.
Well, thanks for being a business partner with us.
So Wendy, again, thank you for joining us, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to meet you all. My name is Wendy Knight. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Liquor and Lottery. I have been the Commissioner here for 4 years in April. I started out briefly as the Deputy Commissioner and then have been in the appointing authority role for 3.5 years. I was the Governor's first Tourism and Marketing Commissioner, and I saw you, Mr. Chair, a lot more then, and that was a policy committee for the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And then I took a 2 years off to go help my brother run his business, and I'm thrilled to be back. The Department of Liquor and Lottery is very unique within state government because we run businesses. So we have 2 enterprise funds. One is the Division of Liquor Control and the other is the Vermont Lottery. And so what that means is the state authorizes the department to run those businesses. And so just like any business in the private sector, we're responsible for generating revenue, making sure that the operating costs are lean, and then we transfer those profits to either the general fund or the education fund. So on the lottery side, we have about 582 lottery agents across Vermont. In FY24, we had about $168 million in lottery sales. Those are from the tickets. And then we transferred 35 million of that to the Ed Fund. So again, we operate under the construct of lottery agents. We have a couple of different types of lottery games. You have the what you know is the draw game. So that's the Powerball, Mega Bucks, and those are under the multi-state jurisdiction. So there's a multi-state lottery association that's the governing body for that. And then there's Tri-State, which is Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And then there's some games that operate under Tri-State, and then there's the Vermont Lottery. And so a lot of those you'll see, like the instant ticket games, for example. So an array of lottery tickets that we sell. On the 802 Spirits side, Vermont is a control state, which means that the only way you are able to buy distilled spirits is through an 802 Spirits store. We have about 80 of them throughout the state. Whether you're a bar or a restaurant, or you have a catering business, or you're a ski resort, if you are having distilled spirits on your premise or is in a package store, then you buy the alcohol through us. So we have a purchasing unit, we have a logistics and warehouse unit, we buy the alcohol from international suppliers, it gets delivered and sorted in the warehouse, it gets picked and loaded and sent to the 802 Spirit stores. We have an agreement with them, so they sell the alcohol for us on a commission. So the way we pay the alcohol 802 Spirits agents for the distilled spirits is through a commission. So it's a very unique government agency because we're running businesses, but we're doing it within the confines of a state regulatory agency. The other enterprise that's new to us is sports wagering. We have 1 full year of operations of sports wagering. We were generated 3.5 million in revenue share for the FY24. So the first 6 months of FY24, we generated 3.8 million, and that goes to the general fund. Unlike Vermont Lottery and Liquor Control, which are businesses, sports wagering, we're really just the regulatory agency. So we're not running a business. We allow the sports wagering operators to operate in Vermont. We are the regulatory body to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do under the contract. And so it's really a regulatory function and then collecting the revenue share. What makes us unique is that we have a dual mission, right? So we're supposed to be selling products and transferring that revenue to the general fund or the ed fund, but we're doing it within the construct of public safety and harm reduction. So we have a responsibility component to our mission. And so we are allowing licensees to sell and serve alcohol, but they must do it safely. And so we have a requirement that they take education courses as a condition of their license. And then we have a whole compliance and enforcement team to ensure that the delivery of alcohol serving and selling is done in a responsible way. We work in partnership with the Vermont Department of Health on the sports wagering and Vermont Lottery side. We have a contract with the Department of Mental Health on responsible gaming. So we have a infrastructure there where we help fund the Department of Mental Health's responsible gaming program. So whether you're coming to their 800 number or their website for help, either you can coming from them from a direction of playing lottery or from online sports wagering. So that was new when we passed the sports wagering laws to make that more comprehensive. So I'm going to pause for a second. That's kind of the overview umbrella of the department. Any questions?
John?
So for Vermont-based producers of spirits, how do they work with your organization to negotiate, or do you negotiate on their behalf for shelf space within an 802 Spirits and other sort of distribution elements?
Yes. So what we do with our 802 Spirits, you're talking about the Vermont distillers. So if you're a manufacturer in Vermont of distilled spirits, you're going to come to the department. First of all, there's a listing. So you need to be listed, right? So that we agree to sell your product. And then we have a process where we procure your alcohol. It comes to the 802 Spirits warehouse that we operate, and then we bring it on the trucks based on the order. So it's no different than any other international supplier. Like we get the sales, the 802 Spirits stores have what we call par levels. So based on their prior sales experience, they're going to put orders together in terms of what they want in terms of alcohol. Most of the 802 Spirits stores, we have a couple different shelf space options for the 802 manufacturers, the Vermont manufacturers. A lot of them have indicated to us that they prefer to be on the category shelf. So if I'm Mad River Distiller, for my bourbon, I want that to be on the bourbon shelf. You will see often that in some stores there is a separate Vermont shelf. That usually is a duplicate. The one exception is what we call a kiosk model. So these are smaller footprints where they don't have the whole product inventory. They might have the top 50 sales products and then mostly Vermont products. And a lot of times you'll see those separate Vermont spirits manufacturers displayed there. The other option we have recently launched about a year or so ago is a cocktail rack program. And this is done in conjunction with our 802 Spirits. Yankee Magazine is one of our marketing partners. And so we have some of these Vermont distilled spirits will opt to participate in that. And then we have you'll see the cocktail rack set up in 10 different stores across the state. We've increased that to 15. And then in that, there's on the magazine, the 802 Spirits magazine, there's a feature story of the distiller. There's some cocktail rack recipes, and we do a whole campaign on that. And we've seen great success with that in terms of increasing the sales for those products.
Thank you.
Moving on to that, what about exporting? Jonathan just mentioned the distillers that are in the state of Vermont. Well, if you're the only company that can deal with spirits, how do they get their product out to other states, to other countries?
So we only have jurisdiction of selling in Vermont. And so the distillers themselves, often they do have partnerships with importers for other states. Many of them do sell their distilled spirits in other countries. Not countries, sorry. Actually, we have some in Canada, but in other states. So we don't have control over the sale of product that's outside of Vermont. We have the control of the sale of spirits within Vermont. And for your own education, I think it might be helpful to have, a Vermont distiller or Vermont winery or Vermont brewery talking about what they want to do in terms of being able to sell their product in other states.
I'm curious if you're finding like any kind of shift in revenue with cannabis legalization. I've heard reports of people kind of shifting from alcohol to cannabis.
Yes.
Finding that in your numbers?
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. Thanks for the question. So nationally, what we're seeing, at least in the last year, is that alcohol sales are down. Alcohol consumption is down. So for a control state like us, when people are consuming less alcohol for a variety of reasons, that means we're selling less. And some of the reasons for that nationally, including in Vermont, are, the younger demographic is choosing to have non-alcoholic or low alcoholic products. People are consuming less alcohol for health reasons. We've seen a lot in the news about the relationship between certain cancers and alcohol. And I think people are being more intentional. I think inflation plays a part in this. And we've also seen in states that have legalized cannabis that alcohol consumption in general is about 1 or 2% down. We were also impacted by the floods of July 2023, where we had at one point 10 stores that were closed. So that impacted sales as well. But I think nationally, for sure, across all categories, whether it's spirits, beer, cider, wine, there is a restriction. People are consuming less, and those companies that are manufacturing those products are earning less. And I have been saying to the state and to, the finance and management team that we just need to expect less revenue from the sale of alcohol because consumption is going down. We're not in the business of promoting the consumption of alcohol. All we do is let people know where it is, how much it is. That's our role. what's on sale, which isn't our sale, it's a supplier's sale. So same with lottery. We're really not in the promotion of, advocating people buy more lottery tickets or alcohol. It's just letting people know where it is and how much it is.
Thank you.
Questions? How about the our breweries and our microbreweries in the state? That's become a huge industry in the state of Vermont, and how do they work with you in getting their products out? I'm assuming similar to the liquor part.
So we do not control the sale of beer, wine, cider, or low ABV ready to drink cocktails. So that is done in the private sector. Our relationship with the Vermont wineries and cider makers and brewers is that, first of all, we regulate them. So they get a manufacturing license from us. Many of them have fourth-class tasting rooms, which means it allows them to sample their product and then as a component of that sell bottles. So we license them for that. Oftentimes they will have, like the Vermont Brewers Association will have a festival and we'll give them a festival permit. So mostly we are regulating them and giving them licenses. We're not in the business of helping them in any way, shape, or form with their products. Having said that, what we do recognize is that our business customers are part of what makes Vermont, right? So these are small businesses, often even the manufacturers, they're small comparatively. So we're always looking at ways that we can, from a regulatory perspective, support their businesses in a way that helps them grow, as long as it doesn't impact public safety, right? So if they're looking to add additional tasting rooms, for example, because they benefit when they have tourists come up and they want to have additional tasting rooms, we don't think that that has a negative impact on public safety, for example. And so we want to find ways that we can support our licensees. We're always looking to find ways to be more efficient and to be less frustrating, right? Like people have horror stories of working with government, not so much Vermont. I think Vermont does a good job with its scale, but the online licensing portal, for example, it used to be that you would have to write in a check and handwrite an application and literally mail it to us or drop it off. And now we have an online licensing portal, which is wonderful. But part of the issue is, like, when you have new technology, there's an education that component that's required. And there's also IT sometimes just doesn't work. And that's very frustrating. So we're always looking for ways to support our businesses by being a less frustrating government agency to work with and finding ways to be more efficient and to be more business friendly.
We certainly appreciate that. Kurt?
With sports betting, we've hit a year anniversary in that. And I'm trying to remember if you could remind me how many companies that
we have. Yep, we have 3 sports wagering operators. We negotiated contracts with them. The legislature was really wise in not putting the set tax rate in statute, which is what the operators and their lobbying firms had advocated for. Most other states that have done that have seen like 10%, 15%, 7% tax revenue. What we were able to do is negotiate a revenue share specifically with those operators. So we have a 33% revenue share with FanDuel, a 31% revenue share with DraftKings, and a 31% revenue share with Fanatics. So that gives us the ability to earn significantly more than if we had put a set tax rate in statute. So for example, when we talk about FY24, that, that basically composite, 31.9, depending on, the wagering that came from each of those individual operators, netted the state 3.5 million. You can do the math that if it were 10%, it would be significantly less. We have seen in the past, so the start of the fiscal and more towards as we've gotten into the fall, is the revenue share has been growing less than what we thought it might. So if you take the first 6 months, 3.5, you sort of think, all right, well, if we had a full year, it might be 7 million, which was what our initial projection was. But what's occurring is that especially with the NFL, sports bettors are wagering on the favorites, and the favorites are winning, meaning that the higher percentage of the handle is going to winning payouts. So if the total handle was 140 million, for example, that was bet, 89%, almost 90% is paid out in the winning payouts, which is great for the bettors that are winning their bets. What it means for the state is we actually earn less revenue share when players are winning more.
Vermonters are hitting 90% of the time.
No, I would say that the winning payout equals about 89 to 90% of the total handle.
How much?
Which is different than saying Vermonters are winning 90% of the time. So we have to be clear about that.
For the lotto ticket sales, what's the percentage of that goes to the ed fund, or it goes to the ed fund and one other fund?
No, it goes to the ed fund.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was 35 million FY24. I can give you the breakdown. It's basically, it's quite simple. You have the total sales from the tickets, less the operating expenses, and whatever is left over goes to the ed fund.
Okay, that's what I needed to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you may have constituents that come to you and say, why are we having such an issue with providing dollars for our ed fund when we are selling all these tickets and everything? Well, 35 million seems like a lot of money, but when you're talking over $2 billion for an ed fund, that's a drop in the bucket.
Yes, it is. That's a great point. And so what that equates to, that 35 million, that's 1.8 million of the ed fund. That's only contributing 1.8 million of the ed fund. No, sorry, 1.8%.
Yes.
So tiny, less than 2% of whatever we contribute. 35 million, as the chair said, sounds like a lot of money, but for the needs of the ed fund, we do our part, but lot more needs to be done on the ed fund for sure.
I was going to take us away from lottery, if that's okay. Can we a little bit more of and I don't know if you were going to talk about this at all, but of how you intersect with our committee on the insurance piece. Can you talk a little bit about the insurance issues that have been ongoing in the state for bars and what we've been doing to dram shop all that and how that, yes, has impacted?
Yes. I could talk a little bit about it. It's actually Department of Financial Regulation that has more information on that, but there was 2 years ago a bill passed. So we do not require liquor liability insurance as a condition of getting a liquor license. The only exception are if there were violations. What's happening in the insurance market, and we hear this a lot from our licensees, particularly in the Chittenden County area, is that insurance premiums are exorbitant. First of all, if they can find it, it's expensive, and oftentimes they can't find it. It's particularly challenging for bars and restaurants that stay open, past 10. They might have music, the percentage of alcohol they send. So more like a bar or a club, they're going to have a harder challenge in getting the liquor liability insurance. I know that the Department of Financial Regulations has been having conversations, and they would be great for you to talk to in terms of the progress. And then also I would urge you to talk to some of the bars and restaurants in the Vermont Chamber to give reports back in terms of whether or not that bill is changing the needle and whether or not it's, less expensive and less challenging for them to secure the liquor liability insurance. I just know when we have these Capital for a Day events with the governor and we go out and we host liquor license conversations, we hear this quite a bit. And it's something we also hear when we have our quarterly stakeholder meetings. So we meet with the 802 Spirits agents, the licensees, and we do hear that. So that it's definitely a problem. And I think the Department of Financial Regulation will give you some instances as what is this unique to Vermont? What is it? What makes it unique to Vermont? Are bars and restaurants in New Hampshire or New York or Massachusetts experiencing the same level of frustration and challenge and impediments, or is it something related to what Vermont has in its system or its laws?
And I guess my follow-up is, are you seeing a decrease in the number of license holders because of insurance? Are you seeing any impact that you?
I could get you the numbers, but no, we are not seeing a dramatic decrease in the number of bars and restaurants that are seeking liquor licenses. I think post-COVID, some of those license holders didn't make it. So surely during COVID, when, bars and restaurants were closed and there were a lot of restrictions, we saw coming out of that some of those bars and restaurants did not reopen. But I can follow up with a trend, but I'm not hearing of that or seeing that in terms of a decrease because of the inability to get liquor liability insurance. Again, it's not a requirement for us. We don't require you to have liquor liability insurance. The landlord will often require someone to have a liquor liability insurance. And I think that's some of the specific changes that were made in that bill. I don't have the number.
Yeah, impacted that.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful.
When you look at you talked about liquor sales are down, but are you able to extrapolate sales that are in the stores, in the liquor stores, and then sales of restaurants?
Yes.
Because I'm wondering, are we seeing a decrease in both? Bars and restaurants, and then decreases also over the counter.
That's a great question, and yes, we do segregate it. So we can look at what we call the walk-in customer. So that's the person that's coming into an 802 Spirit store and buying alcohol for themselves or whatever, private consumption. And then there's the bars and restaurants who still walk into an 802 Spirit store, but they are buying the alcohol to sell at their on-premise. What we're seeing is that the sales for the on-premise bars and restaurants is actually sustaining us a little bit. So we're seeing less of an increase, less of a decrease. So we're seeing less of a decline with the on-premise licensees. And I can give you that breakdown too, because you're able to see, and we track that on a weekly basis, we're able to see how the growth of the licensees sales compared week over we do year over year comparisons. So we look month year over year, and we look week year over year, and we can see the differences. And we see that the bars and the restaurants and the on-premise are doing well comparatively than the walk-in customer, which is good, right? Because you have to remember the state actually earns more total tax revenue through the sale of a spirits through a bar and a restaurant. And that's because of the alcohol component of the rooms and meals tax.
That's really interesting because the challenges that especially restaurants are having in finding help.
Yes.
They're closed more days than they used to be. And still we're seeing that being sustained or increasing a little bit. I think that's really interesting.
What we have done is because we see that the on-premise licensee sales are doing better than the walk-in customer. And because the bars and restaurants, these are, again, this is like the anchor of a lot of our downtowns, might be a resort or a hotel or a bar or a restaurant or a tavern. And so we want to make sure that we're supporting those entities. So we've done a couple of things in the last year or so. We have an on-premise sales program. So it's, you know, it's something that we offer to give the bars and restaurants a discount, because prior to that, they basically are paying the same amount of money, a retail, price basically that you or I would for purchasing a product. So we've created an on-premise sales program that gives them a little discount, and the suppliers fund that. We have what we call a B2B website. So we're launching this spring a website that's designed for the bars and restaurants to purchase alcohol from us in a much more efficient and manner. So if you think about Amazon and you go online and you create an account for Amazon, that's the idea behind this B2B website. So it allows our bars and restaurants, those third class licenses, the on-premise licenses, to not have to walk into a store and purchase their alcohol alongside a customer, but they can go on, they can create a shopping cart. If there's a product they have that's out of stock, it will show 3 different products. It will tell which of the stores have their product. They'll be able to create their order and then, either arrange to have it picked up or delivered. So we're really excited about that. That's going to make it a lot more efficient for the bars and restaurants. So we're constantly trying to find ways to support the bars and the restaurants because we know how important they are to communities and to Vermont.
What does that affect the retailers that are selling the product, over the counter?
Nope, because
No?
the sales go through the 802 Spirit stores. We're not
Okay.
selling the alcohol. The 802 Spirit stores are
Okay.
selling them, and they get their commission.
Great. Other questions at this point? Go ahead, Dave. and Emily.
Back to lottery for a moment, if we may. You said that the operating costs come out first and then the proceeds go to the education fund. I assume that operating costs include not only the component for you to run your department that's devoted to those tasks, but also for the various sales agents. And I'm curious to know, is that done on an individual shop basis? Or, for example, if it's a Tennybrook Market chain or a Maple Fields or something like that, is that aggregated by the chain? How does that side of it work?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So the agents, we have about 582 lottery agents, and they're paid on a commission. They're paid on a commission of sales. And so that would be part of the operating expenses and the winning payouts for that matter, right? You have $168 million in sales of the lottery tickets. And from that, you pay our lottery vendor, Scientific Games, that manages all the back end and the vendors, and that pays the commission to the lottery agents. It pays the department's operating expenses related to Vermont Lottery. And then what's left over is what's transferred to the Ed Fund.
Thank you.
So it's based on individual sale of the lottery agents.
Just back to the online sales for bars and restaurants. Is that system going to be, that'll be maintained by the stores, and I'm guessing they can come pick them up there, but the listings for all of that, is that maintained by the 802 Spirits like central office, or does each
Yes.
retailer put in their inventory?
Yes, so the department is the one that manages all the inventory, right? And then the online sales website is just a way for the bars and restaurants to purchase alcohol by going online and placing an order. They still need to physically go in and pick up the product. Or in some jurisdictions, like in Burlington, there's delivery services. So if I own an 802 Spirits store in Burlington Bay, let's say that's mine and not Al and Kim Gobey's, right? Like I might arrange to have, because I'm doing a lot of licensee sales, a delivery service. So rather than all my licensees coming into my space, I'm going to contract with a delivery service to get them the product that they've ordered from me. So basically for the store, the 802 Spirits agent, as well as the licensees, this website is just going to be a much more efficient way of ordering. Right now, literally like licensees will call the 802 Spirits agent and place an order, or they'll text them, or they'll send an email, or they'll walk in, and we just want to make it much more efficient. Recognizing that time is money. So if we can help the bars and restaurants in a much more efficient way of ordering and doing business with us, then that's great. Then that's less time they have to take away from their operations to go into the stores and pick up the alcohol, order the alcohol.
You have more to get into, Wendy?
No, I think that's great. I think, our goals for this year, we do not have a proactive legislative agenda. So our goals this year are to really focusing on customer satisfaction. We have this is the second year we've done a customer satisfaction survey. And so we're constantly looking at how to reevaluate the network as well. We're adding some more kiosk stores in some of those heavily touristed areas. We're looking at rolling out more self-serve vending machines on the lottery side with agents getting the self-serve vending machines. Players seem to really like that. And then we're rolling out a $30 ticket this spring. So those are some of the priorities that we're focused on.
Wow, interesting. Can you just touch on your regulatory side on, we didn't touch tobacco yet.
So what do we do on tobacco? So we do our tobacco compliance. So our Office of Compliance and Enforcement does the tobacco audits where they're basically, this is where we use our minors and we go into retail stores and the minors attempt to make a purchase of tobacco, and then we're able to see the compliance rate and how the agents, the stores themselves are doing in terms of checking ID and making sure that they're not selling the tobacco. We do that on the alcohol side as well.
And how's our compliance rate? What are the stores
I
looking?
think so it's mandatory on the law, on the tobacco side every year. And I think we have like a 90, I can get you that, but I think it's like a 92% compliance rate, which means that most of the stores are making sure that they're checking for ID and not selling tobacco to minors.
I work in a cannabis shop that also has a liquor store attached to it. And I was curious if you also, do you all deal with the tobacco compliance as far as the vape carts and stuff go, or is that more on the CCD like side of things?
I have to follow up with that. Like I know there's tobacco, do we call it paraphernalia?
I think we call it paraphernalia. I know there's just like this interesting gray area
Yeah.
thing.
Yes. Yeah.
So kind of curious, trying to understand where the lines fall.
Yeah, and I can follow up with what is our regulatory jurisdiction of the, I know there was some guidance, but I just don't know that off the top of my head, so I can definitely follow up with that.
Thank you.
I know last year you were talking about online sales of vapes and those issues. And I think, you drafted an amendment that we didn't need to use because I think you were going to continue having an investigator continue to look at online sales. And I'm just wondering where that is and if there's recommendations there, because I think the thought was that we would use the funding of the fines that you were receiving to actually pay for that full-time equivalent investigator to be doing online investigations.
Yeah, I have to follow up with you on that. I know it's through a partnership with the Attorney General's office, so we don't actually collect fees or fines. What would happen through our work is if we find out that someone is violating laws and selling illegally online products, then we share that information with the Attorney General's office, and they're the ones that do the cease and desist letters and any settlements.
Okay. we'll touch base with the Attorney General's office as well, but that was something that well, I was interested in
Mm-hmm.
because I think, we were, another committee was interested in actually strengthening the laws even more on stores. But the real issue wasn't really coming from stores. It's more on these online sales that we were
Mhm.
hearing about. So before we start strengthening those, we want to make sure that we're actually getting to the bad actors that are out there selling in Vermont. And I know there was the Attorney General's office, I think, had a grant that they ran for a couple of years, and through investigations and everything they brought in 2 years, I think $900,000 in fines. So it just made a lot of sense. Like, why don't we just keep going after these people with an investigator, and we could pay for that with the fines that they're bringing in, and the rest could go into the general fund. So we'll follow up again with the Attorney General as well to see where that's going.
Yeah, and I know that we have no additional in our budget. We're not requesting any full-time employees, any more
Right.
employees.
Yeah.
Obviously, the governor is focused on affordability, so we're trying to keep our budgets lean.
Yep, understood. But if we find an area where we can pay for it through keeping people safe and keeping the vapes out of kids' hands, and still be able to pay for it through fines instead of out of the general fund, I think we're way ahead of the game there. Great. Other questions for Commissioner Knight? Anything else you want to add, Wendy?
No, I'm sorry I can't be in person, but I'll see you at some point, and I have a few things I'm going to follow up with you.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for joining us today. We certainly appreciate it. Good to see you, even if it's virtual.
Nice to see you all.
And we'll see you in the building at some point.
Absolutely. Thank
you
you.
very much. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Committee, our next starts at 3:00, a good time for a break. So be back promptly at 3:00. We'll taking up H99, having more discussion, and then try to figure out where we go with that. So I think we can go offline.